The dense forest stood still, its towering trees casting long shadows over the quiet ground. Morning sunlight pierced through the canopy in patches, creating pools of light on the forest floor. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the distant fragrance of pine. Beneath this quiet, something was stirring, a silent tension wrapped in the pulse of the forest's rhythm. In the heart of the wilderness, a small red squirrel moved cautiously through the underbrush, her fur a fiery red with flecks of gold blended with the autumn hues of the forest. But the squirrel was not concerned with camouflage. Her focus was elsewhere, on the thinning food supply, on the unsettling silence that had hung over the woods for weeks. The squirrel, whom we'll call Nara, had spent her life in this remote sanctuary, a protected patch of land untouched by the encroachments of human settlements. Yet something was amiss. The trees she once relied on for sustenance were failing to produce the abundant acorns they had in previous years. The sweet, crunchy kernels were scarce, and Nara had begun to notice strange things happening in the woods. Trees standing bare, their bark scarred with deep, unnatural marks. The squirrels that shared her territory were becoming thin, their coats dull, and their movements sluggish. Nara paused atop a large, moss-covered rock, her small body tense, ears swiveling at every sound. A distant rustle caught her attention, the sudden movement of something in the tall grass. Her sharp dark eyes scanned the area. She knew better than to be careless. Predators lurked in the shadows, and there was an unfamiliar edge to the usual forest sounds now. Even the wind, when it came, seemed to carry with it an unnatural chill. The days passed in a haze of constant searching. Nara was not alone in her hunger, and the struggle to find food had become more intense with each passing day. Her once hidden caches of acorns had long been raided, either by desperate squirrels or perhaps something more sinister. The other animals, once so trusting of the forest, had grown increasingly anxious, scattering at even the faintest noise. Nara, desperate, made her way toward the southern edge of the forest, where an old oak tree stood, its twisted branches reaching skyward like skeletal fingers. The oak had always been a reliable source of nourishment, a beacon of hope in the dwindling days of autumn. But as she neared the base of the tree, something was wrong. The ground around it was disturbed, the once soft soil now trampled and churned. In the distance, a set of deep, dark claw marks ran across the trunk of the oak, gouging the wood with unnatural force. A low, rumbling growl echoed from behind the tree. Nara froze, every muscle in her body tightening. It was a sound she had heard before, but never so close, never so real. The growl grew louder, accompanied by the unmistakable scent of something larger than any animal she had ever encountered. A creature of the forest that was not native to these woods. The heart pounded in her chest, the rhythm deafening in her own ears as she crouched low to the ground, her fur prickling with fear. The scent was intoxicating, metallic, and wild, but it was not the scent of any predator she had learned to avoid. The sounds of the forest, birds calling, leaves rustling in the breeze, seemed to fall away as her focus sharpened entirely on the sound of something stalking the woods. With a swift motion, Nara darted to a nearby tree, her tiny paws almost silent on the bark as she scaled the trunk in a single fluid movement. She paused on a branch, her sharp claws digging into the wood as her eyes scanned the forest floor below. Her breathing was shallow, heart thudding, every instinct urging her to run further, to hide deeper. But something made her stop. There, beneath the twisted oak, was a creature unlike anything she had ever seen. It was tall, with a shaggy, unkempt coat that blended with the forest floor. Its eyes, gleaming with a strange, calculating intelligence, scanned the area with unnerving precision. A large, drooping mouth was set in a grimace, as though it had been waiting for something, or someone, to venture into its territory. Nara's eyes narrowed. The creature was an invasive species, a predator introduced to the sanctuary years ago in an attempt to balance the ecosystem. But in the absence of natural predators, it had flourished, unchecked, its presence now a dark force within the very heart of the forest. The ground beneath her suddenly trembled. Something heavy was coming toward the oak, something much smaller than the beast but no less dangerous. A gray squirrel, its fur thick and wild, was approaching the oak, seemingly unaware of the lurking danger. The gray squirrels had always been a challenge for Nara's kind, larger and more aggressive in their search for food. But this one was different. Its eyes were wide with panic, its movements erratic. Before Nara could react, the gray squirrel's fate was sealed. The creature's long claws reached out, swiping with terrifying speed, and in one swift motion the squirrel was gone. Nara gasped, her tiny body trembling on the branch. She had never seen a predator hunt so mercilessly, so quickly. The forest had always been a place of delicate balance, but this was something entirely different. As the creature consumed its prey, Nara's mind raced. She could no longer survive here, not in a forest that had been so radically altered. The balance had been tipped, and she had no choice but to flee. The only question that remained was where to go. The sanctuary she had always called home had become a dangerous place, where even the shadows were enemies. With a final glance at the remains of the gray squirrel, Nara scurried further into the trees, her heart still racing. Her world had changed, but the real threat was not just the invader. It was the silence that had fallen over the forest, the unnatural quiet that had become the backdrop to this new, terrifying reality. And Nara knew, with a sinking feeling in her chest, that the struggle for survival was far from over. The forest she once knew would never be the same again. As Nara disappeared deeper into the forest, the shadows seemed to close in around her. She knew that even the sanctuary of the trees might not be enough to keep her safe for long. Nara's heart pounded in her chest as she darted through the underbrush, the leaves beneath her tiny paws rustling like whispers in the wind. She was running on instinct now, the sudden shift in the forest's atmosphere driving her faster than reason. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sent waves of dread through her, as if the very forest itself was turning against her. It was as though the world she had known was unraveling, and she was caught in the middle of it. The sun had begun to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. The light that filtered through the trees no longer had the warmth it once did. It was as if the sky itself was mourning the changes beneath it. Nara's path was becoming harder to navigate, the once familiar trails now shrouded in uncertainty. She scrambled up the trunk of a massive birch tree, its smooth bark cool against her claws. From the height, Nara could see more clearly, her eyes scanning the distant tree line. But something was wrong. A presence lingered in the distance, a shifting form just beyond the trees, too large for a fox and too fluid for a bear. Nara's breath caught in her throat. As she realized it wasn't just one creature, there were others, several, moving with a silent, practiced grace through the forest. They weren't animals she recognized. They were something else entirely, something that had no place in the sanctuary. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. The distant growl from earlier returned, but now it was joined by a chorus of deep, unsettling noises, low growls, strange hisses, and the cracking of branches under heavy weight. Nara held her breath, her body pressed against the bark of the tree as she watched, wide-eyed, the shadows moving toward her. Suddenly, a rustling sound broke the tense stillness. A figure emerged from the underbrush, its fur matted and gray. It was another gray squirrel, but its movements were sluggish, as if it had been injured. Its eyes were wild, pupils dilated with fear. As the creature stumbled forward, it paused, sensing Nara's presence, but the terror in its eyes was unmistakable. The gray squirrel seemed to know, without question, that it was being hunted. Before Nara could react, the air grew cold and the forest seemed to hold its breath. From the shadows, something moved swiftly, a blur of claws and fur, striking like lightning. The gray squirrel's body jerked violently, and within moments it was gone, consumed by the unseen threat that lingered in the dark. Nara's heart raced as she clung to the tree, her legs trembling with fear. She had to move, had to keep going. There was no safety here anymore. In that moment she made a decision. She could no longer wait for the forest to return to its former balance. The invaders, the creature, the gray squirrels, the predators, they were all part of a new order, one that she didn't belong to. Nara had to leave. She had to find a new place, a new sanctuary, where she could survive. With one last glance at the wreckage left behind by the predator, Nara leapt from the birch tree and bounded toward the deeper parts of the forest. The path ahead was dark and unknown, but it was her only chance. She didn't know where it would lead, but the fear of staying in this corrupted place pushed her forward. As she ran, her mind raced with the images of the forest she had once loved. The vibrant, thriving sanctuary that had been her home seemed like a distant memory now, lost to a force she could neither understand nor escape. The invader, that large, monstrous creature, was still out there, hunting and prowling in the shadows. But Nara couldn't let herself be consumed by fear. She had to keep moving. There was still a chance to survive, a small hope that somewhere, hidden from the chaos, there was a haven untouched by the invasion. The night fell quickly, and with it the silence deepened. Nara's heart beat in sync with the rhythm of the forest, the only sound in the vast expanse of trees. But as she ran through the dark, an unexpected sound stopped her cold. A soft, almost imperceptible rustle from above. Nara froze, her body coiled in tension. From the shadows of the trees above her, something descended. The creature was quick, like a shadow darting across the ground, and Nara's first instinct was to flee. But then she saw it, the small figure that moved with grace, its fur a familiar shade of red. Another squirrel. This one, however, was not like the others she had encountered. Its eyes, though small, were filled with something Nara had not seen before: determination. It moved toward Nara, not with fear or hesitation, but with an air of quiet confidence. There was no predator trailing it, no sign of imminent danger. The two squirrels stood in the eerie quiet of the night, neither daring to make the first move. Nara's muscles were taut, her mind racing. Who was this squirrel? Why had it come? And what did it want from her? The other squirrel made no sudden movements, simply watching her. Slowly, it took a step closer, offering a small, almost imperceptible nod. Nara's fear was now tangled with confusion. The scent of the forest had changed, and with it something new stirred within her. An inexplicable sense of calm. This squirrel wasn't a threat, but what had brought it here? What was the reason for its silent approach? Before Nara could gather her thoughts, the mysterious squirrel turned and began to move in the opposite direction, glancing back once more. With a mixture of uncertainty and trust, Nara followed. She moved cautiously, careful not to make a sound. As they ventured deeper into the darkened forest, the world around them seemed to hold its breath. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig, sent waves of anxiety through her. But the mysterious squirrel never faltered, leading Nara further into the unknown. The tension was palpable, but the squirrel's presence seemed to anchor her, to remind her that she wasn't truly alone in this struggle. And as they continued through the dark forest, the twisted branches reaching out above them like claws, Nara realized something chilling. The sanctuary she had once known was not simply dying, it was being reborn in a twisted, unnatural way. The forest, once a place of refuge, was now something else entirely. But the question that lingered in Nara's mind as the night pressed on was this: were they running toward a new beginning, or into the jaws of something even darker than the forest itself? The further they ventured into the darkened forest, the more the atmosphere seemed to thicken. The air, once crisp and fresh, now felt heavy, suffocating almost. The shadows were deeper, more oppressive, as if the very forest was holding its breath. The only sound was the soft scurrying of Nara's paws and the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot, but even these noises seemed muted, as if swallowed by the vastness of the night. Nara's mind raced, her thoughts tangled in the web of confusion and fear that had begun to take root. The mysterious squirrel in front of her moved with an eerie calmness, its body barely making a sound, its fur barely visible in the moonlight that struggled to filter through the canopy. It wasn't just leading her, it was guiding her, moving in a deliberate pattern as though it knew exactly where it was going, as though it had walked these paths countless times before. But where were they headed, and why? The path seemed to grow narrower with every step, the underbrush thicker, the trees closer together, their branches entwining above them like the fingers of a giant hand. Nara's muscles tensed with every movement, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. The forest felt different now, colder, darker, more sinister. Something was wrong. And then, just as Nara's heart began to race in panic, the squirrel stopped. It turned its head, looking back at her with those calm, knowing eyes. For the first time since they began this journey, it stopped to observe Nara, its tail flicking slightly, as though waiting for her to catch up. Nara's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering in her chest. The sense of unease grew, crawling beneath her skin, as if some invisible force was pushing against her, urging her to understand something, to see something she had missed. It was then that she noticed it, a faint, almost imperceptible scent in the air, carried by the wind. The scent was metallic, sharp, and nauseating. It was the same smell she had detected earlier, before the chaos in the forest had begun. The smell of death. A predator. But it was stronger now, more concentrated. Her pulse quickened. The squirrel, seemingly oblivious to the danger, began to move forward again, as if the metallic scent didn't bother it. Nara hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity, coupled with a desperate need to find safety, urged her onward. She followed the squirrel, though every instinct screamed at her to flee. Something about the way it moved now seemed different. Purposeful, perhaps, but it was also unsettling. They reached a clearing. The moonlight illuminated the space in patches, casting long shadows on the ground. The trees surrounding the clearing seemed to bow inward, as though they were watching, leaning in to observe what was unfolding in the open. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of decay. The mysterious squirrel stopped again, its body tense. Nara's eyes darted around the clearing, scanning every shadow, every nook and cranny. The unsettling feeling grew stronger, gnawing at her with each passing second. The forest was alive with something she could not see, something hidden in the darkness. And then, as if on cue, the ground beneath them trembled. A low rumble vibrated through the earth, a sound that seemed to come from deep within the forest, from someplace far beneath the surface. Nara's heart skipped a beat, her ears straining to catch any further sound. The tremor passed quickly, but it left an echo, a palpable sense of danger in the air. The squirrel turned to Nara. Its eyes locked onto hers for a brief moment. Then, with a single, fluid motion, it darted into the thick underbrush at the edge of the clearing. Nara hesitated, but something deep within her stirred, urging her to follow. Without thinking, she bolted after the mysterious squirrel, her paws pounding against the ground, her eyes locked on the path. Suddenly the ground gave way beneath her feet, the earth crumbled, and Nara fell into a pit, deep, dark, and suffocating. Her body slammed against the sides of the pit, and the world spun around her as she tumbled further into the darkness. She landed with a heavy thud the wind knocked out of her. For a moment she lay there, disoriented, her body aching from the fall. Slowly she lifted her head, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. She was in a vast underground cavern, the walls slick and cold to the touch. Strange, unnatural shapes shifted in the shadows, and the metallic scent, the smell of death, was now unmistakable, thick and pungent in the air.